Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Kimberly Macquarie, and I am the Director of Community Programming and the Co-Director of the Innovation Labs here at the Dalí Museum. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this special edition of our Coffee with the Curator series, both our guests who are here in person and those who are joining us online through our stream on YouTube. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a very productive but under-discussed area of Dalínian studies, and that's the period of time that Dalí spent in Bowling Green, Virginia, at the estate of his patron, Caresse Crosby. To delve into this topic, we're going to be joined by Shaina Buckles Harkness, who is our Librarian and Registrar here at the Dalí Museum. But before we get to the talk, we really do need to thank those who make the events like this possible here at the museum. First, I'd like to thank, of course, the City of St. Petersburg for their support of this series and other programming here at the museum. And of course, a thanks to all of our members who make all of our events possible. And remember that if you enjoy today's lecture or you are a frequent flyer here with us, always be sure that you're checking out our website, thedalí.org, through the What's On, and then you can go to our calendar and you can check out all of the events. Some things that you might want to pay attention to that are coming up in July. We are going to have on Thursday the delayed by 1 week premiere of our Follow the Tangent. That is our video podcast. Unfortunately, our guest artist, Yamandu Canosa, who's the exhibit, he had a little bit of a snafu his last week here, and so we weren't able to film. So we were able to catch him on Zoom, and we had a really interesting and robust conversation, actually so robust that we're going to divide it up into 3 parts. And so he's going to do a real deep dive into his exhibit upstairs. So you can catch the first installment of that this Thursday. Next week, if something more active is your style, you can join us for our tango workshop, where you'll be able to watch, but you'll also get to participate and learn how to tango if you don't already know that. Back for lecture on July 14th, we're going to be joined by USF professor, Dr. Susan Mooney, and she's going to be giving us a very interesting lecture on the secret structures in Yamandu Canosa's The Visit. She's really going to think about the relationship between language and the unconscious as you can see it in his work. And she's an expert in psychoanalysis, and so it should be a very, very interesting deep dive into that topic, something that's relevant for Canosa. And also, as we know, Canosa is really riffing off of the surrealist interest in psychoanalysis and the unconscious and the exhibit. So be sure to catch us for that. Our monthly yoga at the Dalí on the 17th. And then we're going to be joined by DJ Eka, who is an amazing Latin DJ, for our Surreal Summer Nights on Thursday, the 21st. So show up at 5:30 if you would like to listen to some Latin music and get your groove on out in the garden. You can dance. You can dance in the foyer too, but the security people will tell you to stop. I mean, just being honest. And then we are going to, if you have any children or grandchildren or neighbor children in your lives, please be sure to let them know that we are restarting our story time at the Dalí program. And that's going to be on Sunday, July 24th. We're going to be restarting that as a once-a-month opportunity in connection with our live dilly-dally. So they can come and they can enjoy a story, and then they'll be able to do a craft after. So it'll be real fun family days on those Sundays. Now, all of that is amazing, but what we're really interested in is Shaina and getting her up here. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Shaina. She and I work very closely together in many areas of the museum. For those of you who know, you know, but for those of you who don't, she serves as our museum's librarian and registrar. She holds a master's degree in library and information science from the University of South Florida and earned her bachelor's degree in French and history from Stetson University. She's really amazing and pretty much knows everything, and if she doesn't know everything, she will find it out for you. Her duties include, but are not limited to, I'll be clear, managing the library and the archives, creating online exhibitions showcasing works in the library, conducting extensive research for upcoming exhibitions and collection research, part of which you're going to be hearing today, and documenting object information into the Dalí Museum's database management system. Today, she's presenting Dalí in Virginia, where she will share a glimpse into that period of time after Dalí arrived in the US, a period that saw him furiously working on his autobiography and producing several important surrealist works. Please join me in welcoming Shaina.
Thank you so much, Kim. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I am very excited to be presenting this topic. It is something I've been working on for about 4 years. I've been going to various archives in Philadelphia and Illinois, and it's mostly because of my nature. I like to find out truth, and so I have been picking apart this topic, like I said, for 4 years. So it is my pleasure to be able to introduce you to some of it. Of course, I'm not going to be able to go into super detail on everything, but I'm going to try and give you an overview. Now, this is about Virginia, but I'm going to take you through some steps. Dalí and Gala getting here, his time in Virginia, and what he was working on. And him getting here involved me telling you a little bit about a woman named Caresse Crosby. So we will begin our journey. So here's Caresse Crosby. She was born Mary Polly Phelps Jacob in New York, in New Rochelle, New York. She is one of the original Zodiac members of Dalí. He had a group of 12 patrons in 1933, and she was one of them. So she was known for making the modern day brassiere. She patented it, and then she shortly thereafter, a couple years, sold the patent. She had already come from a wealthy family, but then she was able to acquire some of her own wealth through that patent. Harry and Caresse Crosby. Harry was extremely important in Caresse's life. She married the dapper, fiery, and oftentimes melancholy wealthy bachelor and poet, who also descended from a wealthy family, and they ended up spending a lot of their time in Paris and the United States. I will say that Caresse Crosby's archives are in the small town Carbondale, Illinois, which 3 years ago I spent a week just delving through. It included Harry's archives and hers, so I was able to get to know them intimately through the archives, which is a fascinating process. So these two together, once they moved to Paris, they founded the Black Sun Press in 1927. And they published their own works, Éditions Narcisse, but later they began publishing for writers such as Hemingway, James Joyce, René Crevel, and many others. And these were just not your typical commercial editions. They were artist books that they were producing. So in 1928, the couple decided to purchase this old rundown mill in France. It was going to be on the property of the chateau at Hermanville. And this would become a center for writers and artists to come together, to party, to write, to do art. And it was fascinating going through her archives because she had her guest book was included in the archive. So you would see everyone's signature that would be entering the Moulin each weekend, and they would stay sometimes weeks, some of these artists. Here's a picture of the mill. And here's a group photo. They're kind of hard to see, and I apologize for that. But we see Hart Crane, D.H. Lawrence, Elsa Schiaparelli, Max Ernst, and even Dalí. Dalí and Gala spent a lot of time at the mill as well. But it was in 1934 when Dalí and Gala made their first voyage to the United States, and Caresse Crosby ensured Dalí's recognition by introducing him to the New York press. And we all know how that ended up. The American press, in a way, fell in love with Dalí, fell in love and hated both, just fine line there. But she created this party in 1935. So when he was leaving, it was this wild party, this dress-up party called the Bal Honorique before the return in January 1935. So Caresse Crosby was truly pivotal to Dalí making his mark in the United States. And here in this photo, you can actually see Gala. I can't really determine which one's Dalí, but here they are at the moulin, the mill, on the grass, these groups of people. So Dalí and Gala would start to go every weekend. And in his autobiography, he described it as being a mixture of surrealists and society people that came there because they sensed that in the moulin, things were happening. And in the next slide, you'll see some of these parties. This is one of the wild parties. But by 1936, at this time, her husband, unfortunately, he had committed suicide. He suffered a lot from depression, and you see it in his poetry. He wrote a lot of poetry for Caresse, and it was very sad. He died at a young age. But in 36, she was a widow, but she was choosing to continue on her life, and that included becoming the lover of a man 18 years younger than she, and his name was Bert. And you'll see the importance of Bert. Here they are together. Now, it was Bert's dream to oversee a farm. Now, Caresse Crosby, coming from a wealthy New York family and then entertaining artists and having her own publishing company, you wouldn't take her too much as a farm gal, but she loved Bert, and she ended up buying Hampton Manor. In fact, she cashed in a majority of her, now I can't think of the word, her stocks to be able to purchase this. And this was like the last of her money. So she purchased this huge mansion on 500 acres of land, 25 miles south of Fredericksburg, Virginia. And she was intent on making this a workable farm. Here it is back in 1939. It was designed by Thomas Jefferson. So, and then it was built by John Hampton de Jarnet. He was a brother, and they had several homes in this area. This house, this manor, is still there today. So here's some views. I want you to really visualize what Dalí and Gala would have been coming into. They were on a large piece of land in the middle of Virginia in the summer. So like I said before, it was to be a working farm. So she bought prize-winning cattle. And the one bull became rather famous, as we'll see later, in a Life magazine spread. Here are some of these prize bulls. Here is the library, and I show you these because we will soon see Dalí and Gala in these places within the manor. Nice country home. Now, those books up at the top would have been the artist books that Caresse and Harry would have been producing when they had their Black Sun press. This is where Dalí would spend many a night writing, playing chess. Here's one of the bedrooms. They never indicate which bedroom Dalí and Gala stayed in. but I like to use my imagination and see which one they may have chosen. Here's a lovely one with a fireplace. And here's the covered French porch where I can just see Dalí and Gala chatting or taking notes, playing chess. Here's one more. Now, from September 1939 through June 1940, Dalí and Gala were actually in Arcachon. Now, hopefully everyone in this room and everyone watching knows what happened in September 1939. World War II was declared, so already the Dalís knew that things were getting difficult in Europe. Now, they were in Bordeaux, Arcachon at the time, so they weren't feeling the heat as much, but it would soon come to that point. This is the villa that they rented, and he did a lot of painting in Bordeaux. Here's another one with Leonore Fini. So they always gathered in groups, so they spent almost a year here. But while they were there, with the outbreak of war, they started planning, and this took intricate planning. You couldn't just hop on a boat and come to the United States. And this is where I become very interested. We, years back, Carol Butler had pursued the government through the Freedom of Information Act and got all of Dalí's immigration paperwork. So we have all that. We have the copies in the archives. They are fascinating. I love chasing dates and visa numbers. And what I've been able to do is a day by day, their movements, or month by month, how they got here, in what ways were they able to get here. Now, this letter came from my study in Philadelphia, the Julien Levy Archives. And I started thinking, oh, May 8th, 1940, Julien Levy's already writing Dalí, and he says, "This is to confirm our understanding that the opening of your exhibition in our gallery will take place November 19th. Your presence will be of the utmost importance." So at this point, Julien Levy is putting it in writing. We need Salvador Dalí here in the United States because here's the solo show. It's going to take place November 19th, 1940. Now, we'll see that that date changes, but this was the premise, one of the premises of getting the Dalís over to the United States. The second letter, of course, is from Caresse Crosby. This is May 14th, 1940. So Dalí and Gala are gathering this paperwork. Now she's saying, "I'm counting on you and Gala visiting me at my country place in Bowling Green, Caroline County, Virginia. Your rooms are ready and waiting for you." Now within this letter, she also talks about the writing of his autobiography, of which Caresse Crosby had a lot to do with. She, in fact, was one of the translators before Chevalier was finally chosen. She also talks about 2 portraits that were commissioned for Dalí. So again, these letters represent to the United States the importance of him coming to this country. This is the best treasure trove possible. I know it doesn't look much to anyone else, but I stumbled across this at the Julien Levy Archives. This was a copy. So Gala had sent it to Julien Levy, and this was a declaration of paintings, May 23rd, 1940, that she had gone to Paris to file this paperwork. In this paperwork, it's saying there's a certain amount of paintings and watercolors that would be shipped over from France to the United States for this exhibit. So in advance, they had to do this paperwork. For over a year now, I've been back and forth with the National Archives trying to find that definitive list, because my sole purpose with this project is to determine what paintings were exactly brought over. What were brought over? What did he paint here? So and there's an invoice number, if you can see it, 7268. These live somewhere in the State Department archives, that invoice. We just have to hope that a very nice archivist will take the time and find it for me. So again, we're just leading up. Here's another telegram. Julien Levy saying it's super important. You have to come here for this exhibit. Now, by June 20th, 1940, Gala and Dalí obtained a visa to go to Lisbon. So they already knew that they were going to try and get out of Europe through Lisbon. And de Sousa Mendes provided this visa for them to come to Lisbon. This was just the first step. Now, some of you may know, but the end of June, the Nazis came in, invaded, so the Dalís were fleeing France. So they had their visa to go to Lisbon. So in purple, you'll see Gala's movements. She goes straight to Lisbon. Dalí doesn't have his passport. Dalí needs a passport. So Dalí first stops over in Figueras, and he goes to Cadaqués, and he's visiting his family, and then he goes to Madrid. So by this time, he has gathered all this paperwork. There's sufficient evidence that the United States would allow him to come for these purposes of the exhibit and for these commissioned portraits. And here it is. I get so excited about this little stuff. I'm a nerd. On July 16th, 1940, he is granted a non-immigrant visa. It is number 55. Again, oh, no. What's going on? There we go. Okay. So he and Gala are ready. Here's the SSX Cambion. It was one of the new four aces, these four luxury ocean liners that were going back and forth between Europe and the United States. And here's their manifest. This was Ancestry.com. So this is how people find their genealogy, because they have all the passenger manifests. And actually, I was able to find every single manifest for each time he came into the United States and went out. And that was through the decades, not just 1940, but from 34 through the 60s and 70s. And here, very small, you see Salvador and Gala. They give their age, 36, 46. Artist, their occupation, artist, painter. Gala is a housewife, and which I found very funny. And then the languages they speak, where they got their passport and their visa. I don't know what's going on. This always happens to me when I'm up here. So here's this beautiful ship. They're on it for 2 weeks. I still can't imagine that. But I'm sure it was fun, maybe like a cruise ship. So 2 weeks journeying from Lisbon to New York. Here they are arriving. So when they landed in New York, it was, they had already planned that they would be staying at the St. Regis for 2 weeks, and then they would arrive in Virginia. Here's another picture of them arriving, and he has a canvas with him. I don't know which painting it is. William, Jeffin, and I have tried to speculate, based on size of this picture, what could be the dimensions. My guess is slave market, because we do know that he made that painting in France. So they arrive on August 16th, and they stay in New York, and then they make their way down to Virginia. A beautiful quote from Dalí in the Chicago Daily News: "The calm beauty of Virginia was an active inspiration after the turmoil of the Europe we left. Besides, rural Virginia has something of the spirit in its terrain of the France and Spain where I worked." So he immediately felt at home and very relaxed, as we'll see here. Typical Dalí pose. He's out in the garden. Here's another one. Just a very relaxed Dalí. A relaxed Gala. And then here, this is part of the Life magazine spread where they're playing chess. This was a daily activity for them. This was in the library of Hampton Manor. Gala usually won. Here's another image. I'm sure it's staged, but they're at the little general country store, sitting there laughing. Caresse is up buying who knows what. But they didn't venture too much out of Hampton Manor, but they would go to the general store. They went to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Now, this was all found out through newspaper articles. If you read every single newspaper article from that time period, you can start to piece together. Dalí went antique shopping for Gala. And this was interesting. So at the same time, Henry Miller and Anais Nin were both visiting Caresse at the same time. So we have these two figures, Henry Miller and Dalí. Who thinks they got along? They clashed significantly. Here's the picture. So funny. So here they are all together posing for this picture. This was on September 10th, 1940. So the Dalís had just gotten there. Here are the Miller and Nin. Now, what happens? Oh, and I'll read this quote. Henry Miller, it's from an article called "When Henry Miller Loathed Salvador Dalí." He says, the writer says, "When Salvador and Gala and Henry and Anais were thrown together at Hampton Manor, Dalí's antics and eccentricities, Miller's personality, and Gala's domineering nature led to a train wreck when egos collide." And Miller would talk about this encounter for decades to come after, and we'll see. So see this picture here, September 10th, but also on September 10th, we see letters. Henry Miller to Caresse Crosby. There was a letter also from the Dalís to Caresse. In the middle of the night, Bert came stumbling in drunk, angry, and just started throwing everything in the manor. Caresse was actually in Nevada at the time visiting her daughter. So here you have these two couples in the middle of the night and this drunk person that they haven't met yet. They immediately flee. So the Dalís went to DC, and I'm not sure where Miller went, but they left until Caresse could come back and kind of soothe Bert. Bert was an alcoholic his entire life, and Caresse had to deal with this a lot. This was not a one-off incident. So they're there for 2 weeks, and they have to flee. But their time here, Anais Nin documented it in her journal. They hadn't counted on Mrs. Dalí's talent for organization. Before anyone realized what was happening, the entire household was there for the sole purpose of making the Dalís happy. No one was allowed to set foot in the library because he wanted to work there. Mrs. Dalí never raised her voice, never tried to seduce or flatter them. It was implicitly assumed that all were there to serve Dalí, the great indisputable artist. So here are these inscriptions, 73 from Henry Miller. The first one says, "To me, SD is a prick of the first water. I know from intimate contact. May he live to screw himself." So I can only imagine I bet you could cut the tension with a knife. And then the other one, now this was to his barber, Henry Miller puts, "For Pierre, Dalí is the biggest prick of the 20th century." And then he says, "Entre nous, just between us." But here's just another lounging, this atmosphere out in this rural area. Caresse Crosby had always owned dogs, loved dogs. So here Gal is with one of them. This is another one of my favorite of Dalí, with the wind blowing through his hair. Here's another nerd thing of mine, which I found in those immigration paperwork. So this was from the Alien Registration Act of 1940. So that directed INS to fingerprint and register every alien age 14 and older living or arriving in the United States from August 1st, 1940 through March 31st, 1944. So Dalí was one of those first waves of aliens. So on September 30th, he had to go down Carolina County Courthouse and register as an alien. From that point on, we see alien cards through 1948, where he's in New York, where he has to register wherever he goes, that the government knows where he is. Here's his signature. So now he's officially an alien in the United States. So Dalí at work at Hampton Manor. There's two main objectives: to finish his autobiography and to prepare for the Julien Levy solo exhibit. Now, originally it was intended to open November 1940, but in time it became April 1941. So these were his two objectives of being at Hampton Manor to get this work done. So here's from the New Yorker. This was a review of the exhibit, but it says, generally he started painting at 8, took an hour or so off for lunch and a game of chess, worked till dinner, and then either painted or wrote till midnight. And he was just monotonous about this. I think I've mentioned in another talk I'd given a couple years ago, he was not haphazard. He was very dedicated, and he set time aside to do his painting. So, of course, he was there to write The Secret Life. And here, all these newspaper articles have been so much fun. You have these little Virginia newspapers, Salvador Dalí visiting here, and then they go on to explain that his sole purpose is to write his autobiography. Here is the picture up at the top where they're in the library with the bull, and they're looking over all these manuscripts of his autobiography. Again, Caresse Crosby was very much involved in the process of this book. Again, she comes from a publishing background. Here's Gala posing as he's painting. There's a mannequin in the background. In the 90s, the person who lived in the Hampton Manor found a mannequin in one of the attic closets. So it was one of the mannequins that Dalí had while he was there. Here's a close-up of him with the bowl and Caresse. And I like to put side by side, there was the empty library, and there they are working on the autobiography. Here's another where he's scribbling. Now, of course, with publication, it's not just a manuscript. Dalí would write some things, then Gala would transcribe, and then it turned into a typescript, which Caresse Crosby helped with, and then it would turn over to Chevalier to be the translator. So while he was there, he also designed a breathing chair. In these articles, it's very funny how Dalí interacts with the press. You know, the design of this chair was intended for him to paint from. So he would sit in this breathing chair and paint. This is another article. This was actually a copy from a 1970. I cannot find the original article. I will succeed, though. Eventually, if it takes me my entire career here, I will find it. But again, just little snapshots of him at Hampton Manor working. So along with writing the manuscript and painting, he was set upon enchanting the landscape. Now, this was very funny because I even went to the building permit office in Bowling Green trying to find the original permit, because Caresse Crosby had to get a permit for Dalí to enchant the landscape. So here he is with a mannequin in one of the ponds. Dalí tells the Life magazine, "I'm doing this enchanted garden as an experiment with the white magic of the Middle Ages. I will use all the modern means of mystification, loudspeakers, electric lights, and wires and mechanisms." And sure enough, in Crosby's archive, I come across this letter, and it's from a sound company, that they want to come out and put in sound to the pond and to all the areas that he was enchanting. Here's the piano with the mannequins and the boats. And it was funny, they would charge admission, and in one of the newspaper articles, it would cost $1 before dark, $1.50 after, and proceeds will go to war relief. Now, if you remember, actually we still have some of the canoes with plants in it. That was based on Dalí's enchanting of Hampton Manor. Here's another one, probably at sundown or dawn. There's a note to myself that I forgot to remove. I told you about the letter, about the sounds. So he also designed jewelry. These jewelry designs were to be included in the exhibit. And it was with this gentleman, Folco de Verdura, who began his career in the 1920s in Paris, designing the iconic Maltese cross cuffs for his friend Coco Chanel. Now, there was an article made, Folco's arrival in Virginia, and Verdura recounts this story that happened to him. He comes to Virginia, Caresse and Dalí have invited him, and they take him to this worn down, like a haunted house, no electricity, it's cold, there's cobwebs everywhere, and Dalí and Caresse are showing Verdura, oh, and this is where we'll work, we'll design this jewelry, and Verdura's horrified. He's wondering, what am I doing here? And at the end, they say, no, that's just a joke, and then they take him to the real Hampton Manor. But when going through the archives, I bet you anything, this was the house, because on the back it said Haunted House 1940. So this was just down the road from Hampton Manor. So just imagine, you have this famous designer, probably in a very nice suit, walking into this. So here we have a picture working on the jewel designs. So they collaborated. There were 5 historic pieces incorporating miniature painting. And then they were later exhibited and sold at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So here are close-ups of these miniature paintings and the designs. And then a piece from our own collection, work on paper. On the top right is the element that was one of the Verdura jewels. And of course, there was magazines, spreads at the time showing these jewels and Dalí's relationship with Verdura. Now, the next thing, of course, he was doing, he was painting. And this is another area where I'm intent on finding out the correct information. Many sources say different things about which paintings he actually painted and how many. Dalí himself is all over the place in news articles. In some articles, he says, I completed 4. And 17 were brought over from France. And then another article will say, I completed 5. So we still don't know exactly. But there's a quote in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, sometimes they come like a flash, sometimes they're hard work. And he is referring to his painting. So again, I talked about in newspaper articles, he tells these elaborate stories, which there's of course truth because the Germans were holding the paintings. We just don't know if it was 17 or 16 or 15. In many of the articles, Dalí says the Nazis are holding, and others it's Germans. Eventually, they all are released and brought to the United States. None were left over. So in this headline, he completes 5 pictures here. So this seems to be the consensus, and we can glean enough information to identify them. And of course, here he says he did 4. So it's always a process with Dalí. I think there was 5 or 6 completed, but the main purpose was he would collect all his paintings from, France, and then the ones that he did here in Virginia, and this would be the solo show. I'm going to skip this slide because I'm going to go through them. Shadow of a Doubt, done and completed at Hampton Manor. In one of the articles from Caroline Progress, he says he has reproduced the familiar insect, a granddaddy. The model for the granddaddy was caught in the backyard at Hampton. Now, in newspaper articles, he clearly names 3 paintings. One of these is Daddy Longlegs. The next one, in newspaper articles, he says it's slave market. Well, we know based on dimensions of canvas sizes, French versus United States canvas sizes, that it couldn't be slave market. Plus, we knew about 90% that slave market was done in Arcachon. So it has to be disappearing bust. And in a newspaper article, he said, that is important because in double images, a third often is suggested or created and perhaps another new series. So the American press was getting a whole side of Dalí right when he comes to live in 40. It's really fascinating. So he's describing his double image, his paranoid critical method to the Americans in 1940 in rural Virginia, of course, but you see newspapers all across the United States are using the same articles. So it was nationwide press. The third, it was definitive. He said he created piano descending by parachute. Now, whether he completed it or not, we're not sure. The Dalí Foundation in Spain dates this circa 1941 because they just don't know for sure. We know it was in the exhibit, but I believe it was probably finished at Hampton Manor. It is now lost. That's why this is the only picture we have of this painting. And Dalí describing to press, "My own pictures have a great deal of mystery and strangeness to me." So he's constantly weaving this web. I think it's great how he just enticed the press to become more and more interested in him and his work. But again, he says, "I can only work when my life is methodic. The maximum of inspiration is the maximum of method." Again, he's not a haphazard artist. He's a trained artist who has a schedule. He paints in the morning from this time to this time. Now, the next painting, these are letters that I found in other archives. Harold McCormick, "I have decided that I would like to ask you to paint a portrait of my wife," he writes to Dalí. Here it is. Again, this one is lost. He did not complete it in Hampton Manor. He went back and forth between Virginia and California to complete the painting. By December 16, 1940, Mr. McCormick has seen the progress. "I am so glad the portrait of Mrs. McCormick is advancing to your satisfaction and that the work is progressing." So that is another one that we know he at least started at Hampton Manor. This next one was a little jewel found in our own archives. No other, I'm not trying to compliment myself, it's just hours of detailed reading. No other paper that I have read has ever mentioned this painting. But in our archives, Mr. Morse goes on and on about a story of the model who came for this painting. And the house was cold, and she complained because, of course, she had to be nude. And Dalí just told her, "You got to keep on pressing on," essentially. And so he at least started this painting. He does not complete it until 1941. It is in the show. But this, by Mr. Morse's words, Dalí had told him these stories, that this was another one, in fact, done at Hampton Manor. This one we're still unsure of, but it's highly likely. He was the ambassador of Spain in Washington at the time. Now, this is the finished painting, but in the 1941 show, there was a preliminary iteration of it shown in the exhibit. Now, we think he may have started this painting due to several letters. Dalí knew him at least months prior. Here he is, the ambassador of Spain in Washington. Here's a telegram from Cardenas to Dalí on July 20th. "For recommending a visa, specify place, date, person. See to this so the necessary inquiry may be made." So in July, or prior to July, Dalí had reached out to him asking about obtaining his visa. So he knew him. We don't know how he knew them, how he met him. But we know that he was engaged in correspondence of Dalí trying to get a visa to come over to the United States. So this one was probably also in July 1940 because it was addressed to Dalí in Lisbon. And it says, "The State Department has no knowledge if your wife asked for visa's passport." So again, they know their boat leaves in August. They need to get all their paperwork in order. So you can just imagine Dalí and Gala trying to go through all these hoops to try and get here. So based on these telegrams, it's highly likely that he started that painting at Hampton Manor. Later on through the years, you see a letter from Cardenas to Dalí has to redo his paperwork later on in the 40s, and Cardenas writes a letter saying, to my knowledge, Dalí has not engaged in nefarious activities, was the word. So they remain in correspondence. But through this, we think that he indeed started that portrait, maybe as a thank you to Cardenas. We're still unsure. Time will tell. And again, so the ultimate goal, now later he does finish his autobiography. He goes back and forth through New York after the April show. He goes to Williamsburg, Virginia, just on vacation, the summer of 1941, writes Caresse a postcard. So then you see Dalí just kind of moving around the United States, back and forth in Virginia, but ultimately California and New York is where he predominantly resides in the 40s. But that culmination was that 1941 Julien Levy show. That's one of the main reasons what brought him to Virginia, allowed him to procure a visa, allowed him to register as an alien and live here legally while the war was going on in Europe. So the show lasted from April 22nd through May 19th, 1941. It's a beautiful catalog. It's an oversized. Here's the inside. So he's talking about fragments from the manuscript are going to be in the show of The Secret Life, are in the exhibit. Fragments from the manuscript, and then also the jewels he designed are in the show, and this is a list of paintings, drawings. You see portraits where the McCormick portrait's there, the Cardenas portrait is there in its preliminary iteration, and then he lists all the jewels, and there was even a crystal in the show. And there's only one photo that I've been able to find with him at the exhibit, and then there's a newspaper article, a title, Salvador Dalí shows works in New York. Art critic of the New York Times does not seem impressed. But I'm going to end on words of Dalí. I am more and more convinced of the lasting value of my work. And that was from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, April 6, 1941. And that's it. Yes.
So do you have a copy of the catalog? And
Yes.
I'm wondering, the list of paintings in the show, can you tell us how many of those are currently in our collection? Or
Not off the top of my head, but yes. If you come and I have it all written down with all my research. Yes. I want to say 5 or 6.
anyone that really is a standout, we say, oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We could, Daddy Longlegs, was it in, I'm not going to start naming because I'm not positive right now. Yes. So it's really fun stuff. Yes.
So we appreciate the value added from your narrative this morning. An obvious question occurs to some of us that in the party with, I think, Henry Miller and others, President Gallic controlled, you might say, Dalí's identity among these influencers and thought leaders in the art world. And so the obvious question is, since she was involved with others in overseeing the interpretation of his autobiography, and he was not a great speaker of English, to what extent do you think, or have you even thought about, Gala reinterpreting, even reimagining his words so that the finished biography became as much hers as his?
Well, luckily, there was a detailed book done by Frederick Lowry, and she takes you through every little scrap from Dalí's own, and then transcriptions So you can see, now I have not read, that tome is about 400 pages. Yes, Doug Gala would clean up the grammar because a lot of you, if you know, he spoke Catalan, Spanish, French, English. So when you read, it's kind of, you kind of have to piece it together. A lot of times Gala would clean that up. But as for the step-by-step, until I read that 400-page, I wouldn't be able to give you a complete answer.
Do you have any sense of whether Gallo was reinterpreting who he is?
No, I do not have a sense. Yes, sir.
Not to sound salacious, but what specifically happened between Henry Miller and Dalí that gave him that impression?
I think it was just two egos that just clashed. You had, Henry Miller, very famous author, writer at the time, with Dalí, who was also very famous. So you take two big personalities. Now, they had known each other from Moulin, the mill, and then here comes Henry Miller, and he's probably thinking, oh, no, not this guy again. But then you see the whole household changes to accommodate Dalí's schedule. So I haven't been able to find like one specific incident. There is, and I can lead you to links, you can always email me. There is an audio recording of Henry Miller. He goes into more detail about the time with Dalí and of course his thoughts on Dalí. Yeah, there's been great research on that. Any other questions? Well, thank you again. Oh, yes?
Were any of his paintings in progress when he fled Europe?
We don't know. And that's why if I can ever get the State Department to provide that invoice, I might be able to look at the declaration of paintings that Gala filled out against that list and against information we know what happened in Arcachon. And we might be able to speculate some of it, if it was nearly finished, was it completely finished? It's really hard. And even the foundation, who has Dalí's archives, doesn't know definitively. So if they don't know, then it's not in Dalí's archives. So then you have to find these other sources. And as everyone knows, working with any government, just trying to find and collate these sources could take a long time. Yes?
Was there any romance between him and Caresse? It kind of seems like implied, but maybe not.
No, she was strictly a patron. She was like this for other artists, other writers. Through the rest of her time, she does this for other artists, and you see it. She stays in the United States after that. She creates these foundations. There was something, Citizens of the World, she was trying to create. So she was always just a patron, and she always just wanted to help these, at the time, young and budding. But then they would, her and Dalí had a relationship for almost 40 years, but not romantic, not that. There is an article floating around, but I don't see proof in it because I've checked back sources. So, yes.
Just out of curiosity, what happened to Caresse and Bert in the end?
Divorce, and then she, I think she gets married again. I don't know exactly what happens to him, but they do get divorced.
I would assume, but was curious.
Yeah. She was left with this farm. Bert wanted this dream of a working farm, but he never wanted to put in the work. It was Caresse who hired the people. She actually learned a lot of the farming techniques. But in the end, she sells it shortly after in the early 40s, just because she can't handle it.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Glad you enjoyed it. Okay.